Okay, so I'm going to go through homework 4 and talk about what you need to do for homework 4. So homework 4 is doing an architecture, and your architecture for that is based on a specific hypothetical scenario. Okay? If I haven't given you a specific fact that you might need, you have freedom to go make up whatever you need to complete the homework. Okay. Please don't send me a bunch of messages asking me if it's okay if you do X and it's okay if you do Y. You've got to be able to do this on your own. Okay. So I'm going to record a video on me going through and doing some architecture work for that homework assignment. And in the project instructions for your actual project, you're going to do something very similar. Okay. So for homework 4, we have a hypothetical with Coastal Biotech, and they currently lease data center space and have physical servers. Okay. Now, ignore the aspects that relate to healthcare, diagnostic tests, etc. I don't know anything about the field, and you aren't expected to know anything about the field either. Okay. So you don't need to think about and get into the weeds of things like diagnostic machines and how do you do testing, and that's irrelevant. Okay, don't fight the hypothetical. What you're being asked to do is create an architecture drawing about the IaaS services you would need to meet the company's growing needs. Right? So you're really just focused on the underlying IT infrastructure, the network, the storage, the servers, etc. Okay? And so your CIO has told you need 2 terabytes of object storage, and it needs to be scalable up and down. You need to have at least 2 VMs for databases per region. You need to have a container infrastructure that scales up or down with the company's needs. You need to have a container management that's simple enough that a small team can manage it. So right there, we can rule out Kubernetes. Kubernetes is going to require a much larger team to support. Okay? So what could you use instead? Well, we talked about some of the different options in the first or second week of the course. Okay? One option you might explore is Nomad. Okay? It's simple enough that you can manage that with just a couple of people. The health data needs to be secured, so you want to make sure that you pick a cloud provider that has HIPAA support. Okay? And so you'll want to do some research to figure out which cloud providers and which regions support HIPAA. Okay? And so you can look at AWS and GCP's HIPAA compliance. If you Google that, you'll find the answers to that. Okay? Your credentials need to be centrally managed and secured. So you need to think about how are you going to manage credentials. Now, if you go single cloud, you could go with a native solution for that cloud provider. If you're going multi-cloud, you're definitely going to need a third-party service. And so we talked about and you practiced with Vault in this class. So that might be one option for you. Okay. You don't have to do both cloud providers in your architecture. You're never going to have to implement this. So it really doesn't matter. It's how you think you would solve this problem conceptually for an architecture drawing. Okay? Again, you don't have to implement this particular example that you create. The last requirement is the infrastructure needs to be deployed into 2 US regions for continuity purposes. Okay? So you've got to think about those requirements, what you've learned, and what you perhaps have explored on your own about the different services that are available in the cloud providers. And then you're going to use some sort of diagramming software, and I don't really care what you use, with the caveat that you cannot do this by hand. You can certainly start it by hand, by the way, and a lot of people will start a drawing by hand on a piece of paper and then actually put it in the drawing software. But you also can't use things like PowerPoint or similar general drawing tools. It looks terrible and it's impossible to understand what you're trying to do. Okay? So you can use Visio, that's available through Cougar Apps. Although I recommend that you use either Cloudcraft or Lucidchart. Cloudcraft if you're doing AWS only. Cloudcraft doesn't support GCP. And if you're going to do GCP or both AWS and GCP, or you decide to do Azure, you can do that as well. Okay, I don't care, since you're not having to actually build anything with it. Then Lucidchart might be the best option. If you want to use a template, go right ahead. Okay? I'm going to go through this briefly in this video, hopefully answer any questions, but beyond that, you're going to need to just make a judgment call, okay? So this is a relatively simple exercise, and don't overthink it, okay? The project, on the other hand, you probably are going to want to talk to me throughout the last few weeks of the course to make sure that you're on the right track with the project-related ask in terms of architecture. So with that being said, let me show you, first I'm going to show you Cloudcraft, and then I'll show you the Lucidchart. So Cloudcraft, when you come in, you can create blueprints, and you can use templates. In this case, I don't recall if this was a template or not, but let me explain how this works. So these blocks here, if you click on them, they tell you what type of service they are. So in this case, it's RDS. That stands for Relational Database Service. That's an Amazon managed database, okay? And the P is a primary node, a standby node, if we do that here, changes it to an S. If we change it to serverless, we still have an S. And if we change it to a read replica, we end up with an R. Okay? A read replica is just a copy of the database that can only be read. There's no writes to that database occurring. Okay? So a lot of times we'll do a read replica if we're just needing to retrieve information from a database, or we need to just do some reporting. Okay? And by read replica, that just means that the primary nodes are replicating the data over here, or the data is shared between all the nodes on a shared file system. Okay? So if, in this example, it says you must have 2 VMs for databases per region, you can either build VMs directly, or you can use something like RDS, where it's a managed database service. Okay? Now, if I were starting out and I were this company, I only had 5 staff, I would probably go with RDS or the Cloud SQL on the Google front, because now the database and all the infrastructure are managed by someone else. Okay? They're handling the setup of the replication, they're handling the backups for you, that sort of thing. So it makes it a lot easier for you to manage. If you don't have a database administrator on your team, then RDS can be a great option. Okay? You're going to pay for that, a premium, but it might be worthwhile. Another thing that the requirement is that you have multiple regions. Okay? And you need to have 2 VMs for the database per region. So right here we have 2 regions. So we have US West on the left side of my screen, and we have US East on the other side. Okay? That's a region. Within US West, we might be in US West A and US West B. Okay? Those are availability zones within a region. So a lot of times when you're doing an architecture, you want to build as reliable and available and scalable of a platform that you can within the constraints of your budget. So a lot of times you might start out with, you have US West and you have US East. And then as you grow your revenue, you might add another availability zone within West, so that if one of the West availability zones goes down, your customers aren't having to go all the way to the East Coast. Okay? Now, within the US, this is not that big of a deal, but when you start talking international regions, you're going to want to have regions close to your customers. Otherwise, say if you only had US-based sites like you do in this example here, if you have a customer in China, they have to go all the way around the world to get to US East, okay? Which means it's going to be a horrible experience for that customer to have the systems in the US East region. So you build a localized region somewhere in the Asia Pacific area for your Chinese customers, okay? Now let's move on to some of these other boxes. So M4, that's the instance size. So when you click on these boxes, you can change what they run, okay? The OS. You can change the size of the instance, okay? So the instance type, and then you can change the size, okay? You can change how you are built. It also then shows you how much this is going to cost, so you can kind of understand the cost structure. You can also create things like VPCs here. Okay, if you have your VPCs already set up, you can just search for the name. You can connect this to your Amazon account. Okay, so let's just say I want to create a VPC, and we'll call this middleware VPC. Okay, now I have a VPC here for middleware. Okay. I can do the same thing here. These are load balancers. I can choose what type of load balancer I have. Okay. And then we can go through and configure VPC, security groups. Okay. So you can see we start building these. This is a security group. This is a VPC. Okay, we can start depicting the network infrastructure on here. This represents clients, okay, this type of setup. And then we can go and just find things that we want to do. So say we want to do an auto scaling group. Okay. So now we can set up an auto scaling group. Here we go. This is our auto scaling group of these VMs. Okay. We can do things like an availability zone. So we can have multiple availability zones. Right now we have one availability zone, but we could have multiples. Okay. For storage, if we're doing high-end storage for, say, our databases, we might do an EBS volume. Okay. And we can say how much storage we need. Okay. We can also get into details of how many gigs of snapshots are we going to have. Okay. For the purposes of this exercise, you don't need to do that, but I mention it just so that you can be aware for your project. Okay. The object storage is S3. So this is a storage that represents a bucket. Okay. So we have an object storage, and we said we needed 2 terabytes. So 2 terabytes is the same as 2,000 gigabytes. Okay. I take that back. 2,048 gigabytes. Okay. So now we've got a 2 terabyte bucket in that particular region. Now we also have to think about, again, if this were a real scenario, we have to think about how many transactions are going to be against it. I don't know. Okay. This is for you to think about. There is no wrong answer on the project, and it's not required for the homework, but since I'm explaining this anyways, I figured it made sense to talk about it. Okay. This is how many times a month, in thousands, by the way. Okay. So if this is 1, that's 1,000. Put, copy, and post, these are interactions with the storage, okay, that are writing to the storage. So think of that as writes. So how many thousand writes are we going to have per month to our storage? We really don't know. Okay? Let's just go with a safe bet and say we're going to have 1 million writes per month. Okay? Now, because that's in thousands, that ends up being 100 would be 100,000. We add another 0 to make it 1 million. Now, let's say for reads, we're going to have a lot more reads because we have customers who, in this case, are checking their test results. So maybe there's going to be 10 million reads a month for this volume. Okay. And then we can choose the type of S3 bucket. We're just going to go with the standard. Okay. Now we can take this and we can clone it to make it easier. And now we have one in this region. Same thing. Okay. We have a lot of different networking aspects we can pick. We have the database I already mentioned. We have things like doing searches. We can have a search engine. So maybe we want to have a search for a customer to be able to search for their test results. Okay. All right. So now we can. This is our design. If we did live, we can actually link our AWS account. Now, you won't be able to link to your student account. It won't work, okay? But then the budget here, and since we're talking about cost structure this week, the budget's going to actually show where your costs are going. So this is a great way for you to go and design an infrastructure, then see how much it's going to cost you, and then the breakdown of the costs. Okay? And you can look at it on a monthly basis, a yearly basis. You can even break it down to an hourly basis. Okay? And this will give you a breakdown of all those costs. Okay? So that is doing this AWS in Cloudcraft. Okay? Now switching gears to Lucidchart. Okay, I might have just refreshed the page on accident, but let's see. Yeah, give it a second. Okay, so you can use a template, and there are a bunch of templates out there. I'll get into those in a second. So we have this ability to use shapes here. Okay? And so I can search for different shapes that I want to use in my drawing here. And so there are AWS shapes. If I search for AWS, I will see that there are a number of different shapes here that I can use. I can do the same thing with GCP, Azure. There's going to be shapes for just general networking and compute. And on my example here, I have a variety of different shapes that I pulled in. So I've got one that I created for HashiCorp Vault, one for Terraform Automation, since there aren't shapes for those. Kubernetes, Nomad, Docker, VMs, Google Compute, Google Storage, S3, EC2, load balancers, all that kind of stuff you're going to find. You're just going to click on a shape, drag it over, resize it however you want. You can use some standard shapes as well. So they have things like rectangles and circles and things. You can color them. There's different options. If you are doing connections between them, you can just literally click on a shape. There's a little, right here you'll see these little dots. If it turns red here, you click on it, drag to another shape, let go. Now we've got a line. We can change arrows and stuff on it up here. Okay. And so we can play around with this and do whatever we want, colorize it, whatever. Okay. What you do with the architecture does not matter to me. Okay. I provided examples back in, I believe it was Module 5. There were examples from other students. So make sure that you go through and look at the examples. Okay. The homework is an opportunity for you to practice. Okay. Your project, you're going to go more in depth than what you did on the homework. The homework is for you to practice and learn the tools. Okay. So you're not going to get marked wrong if you didn't do something correctly. I want to see what you come up with. That's the most important thing to me. So what can you come up with respect to an architecture drawing? I will then give broad feedback in Microsoft Teams based on student submissions. Okay. So I will look at what I see, and then I will give generalized feedback of where I saw problems and where you can generally fix it. I'm going to do that rather than giving individual feedback to each one of you. Okay, so I'm going to grade it, but I'm going to take the feedback and I'm going to generalize it and provide it into Microsoft Teams. Okay. If you haven't joined Microsoft Teams, it's a Cal State system. You should join it. That's where there's a lot of information shared, and I still only see about half the class in Microsoft Teams. So if you haven't joined it, you should join it. You're missing out on a lot of helpful information that gets posted there. Okay, it's a classroom tool. You're going to be falling further and further behind if you don't actually use it. Okay, so please sign up for it, use it. The client should work on the school computers. And if it doesn't, you can contact IT, and IT can get it installed on the school computers for you. Okay, it should work in Cougar Apps as well. And you can certainly do it from your computer as well, your own computer. I believe that it also works from a standard web browser. It should work from your phone, your tablet, whatever. Okay. It's going to be very helpful for you to have that. And it's a little it's a little concerning for me that only about 30 of you out of almost 60 have Microsoft Teams, because you are missing out on a lot of information. Okay. So please take the time to do that. We're coming up on the end of the substantive material of the course. We're only about 4 weeks out from that. And then the last 4 weeks of the class are going to be working on your project. So if you haven't caught up on the homework assignments and you haven't caught up on the material, you need to do that over the next few weeks. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to struggle on the project. All right, and then this is also a reminder that there is no Q&A session this evening. So please make sure that you come to the Q&A/tutoring on Wednesday evening. Okay, that's it.